Commander Thecklon adjusted his optical sensors, letting out what humans might call a sigh, though his species, the Corvani, didn't actually breathe. The dining hall of Nexus Prime's Galactic Academy stretched before him like a monument to interspecies cooperation, or at least, that's what the brochures claimed. Honestly? It looked more like organized segregation with better lighting. The crystalline dome overhead filtered the light from 3 different suns, casting everything in that sickeningly cheerful rainbow glow that Academy architects seemed to love. Tables arranged in perfect geometric patterns hosted students from 47 different species, each group clustering with their own kind like oil refusing to mix with water. As the Hegemony Intelligence Corps assigned observer fancy title for glorified babysitter, Thecklon was here to monitor, analyze, and report on the Academy's cultural exchange initiatives. Translation: make sure nobody started a war during lunch. His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his people. 23 years of monitoring interspecies relations, and he'd learned one universal truth: put different species in the same room, add food, and someone always ended up insulted, injured, or occasionally digested. Today felt different, though. His sensors were picking up unusual tension patterns in the atmospheric readings. That's when Thecklon spotted her. Maya Blackwood sat alone at table 47, methodically working through what appeared to be some kind of protein paste, though knowing human dietary preferences, it could have been anything from processed algae to actual meat. Disgusting creatures, really, with their omnivorous habits and complete lack of digestive specialization. She was small, even by human standards, which were already laughably tiny compared to most civilized species. Maybe 5.5 feet tall, with that peculiar brown pigmentation humans called skin and dark hair pulled back in what their species termed a ponytail. Her clothes were standard Academy issue, simple gray tunic and pants that did absolutely nothing to hide how utterly unremarkable she appeared. What struck Thecklon as odd wasn't her appearance. Humans all looked more or less the same to his optical sensors, but her behavior. She ate with mechanical precision, each bite timed exactly 12 seconds apart. Her posture remained perfectly straight, shoulders square, feet flat on the floor. Most humans he'd observed were sloppier, more animated. They gesticulated wildly, made unnecessary noise, and generally acted like the primitive mammals they technically were. Maya Blackwood, however, sat with the kind of stillness that made Thecklon's threat assessment protocols whisper warnings in the back of his processing centers. She hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving 3 standard weeks ago, hadn't joined any study groups, social clubs, or even acknowledged the various attempts at friendship from other students. She attended classes, completed assignments with boring competency, and returned to her quarters with clockwork regularity. The other students had taken to calling her Ghost Girl not because she was mysterious, but because she seemed to exist without actually participating in existence. Thecklon found her fascinating in the way one might find a defective piece of machinery fascinating, clearly functional, but operating outside normal parameters. The Galactic Academy represented the pinnacle of interspecies education, or so the Hegemony Council repeatedly claimed in their propaganda broadcasts. Only the best and brightest from each member species earned admission to study on Nexus Prime, the massive space station that served as neutral ground for diplomatic, educational, and commercial activities. Admission standards were flexible, depending on your species' political importance. The Vorthak, for instance, those 8-foot-tall, 4-armed walking nightmares had their pick of spots, despite their species' unfortunate tendency toward violence and territorial aggression. But then again, when your homeworld controlled 3 major hyperlane junctions, academic standards became surprisingly negotiable. The Ethereal Collective sent their brightest psychic prodigies, beings of pure energy who considered physical matter beneath their notice. The Hive Queens contributed their most individualistic drones, which was like saying their least conformists. And then there were the Deathworlders, species from high gravity. Hostile environments were rare at the Academy, mostly because they tended to accidentally break things or people. Their planets bred them tough, aggressive, and utterly unsuited for civilized society. Most member species agreed that Deathworlders served better as manual laborers or shock troops than students. which made Maya Blackwood's presence here either a diplomatic gesture or a cosmic joke. Humans came from a Class 12 Deathworld high-gravity, unstable weather, predatory wildlife, and a disturbing lack of natural selection pressure that should have eliminated such a clearly inferior species millions of years ago. Yet somehow they'd developed space travel, primitive weapons, and an annoying habit of surviving situations that should have killed them. The general consensus among Academy faculty was that humans were cute, but fragile primitives who'd gotten lucky with their technological development. Harmless enough, really, like keeping a small pet that occasionally said amusing things. Thek-Lon was beginning to suspect that assessment might be incomplete. The atmospheric tension Thek-Lon had detected earlier suddenly made perfect sense as the dining hall's main entrance dilated to admit 5 figures that seemed to suck the cheerfulness right out of the rainbow lighting. Krextal and his pack of Vorthak supremacists moved through the hall like apex predators surveying their territory, which, to be fair, wasn't far from the truth. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their 4 muscular arms ending in hands that could crush most species' skulls without effort. Their skin had that distinctive metallic sheen that marked them as coming from Vorthak Prime's heavy metal-saturated environment, and their eyes, well, calling them eyes was generous, more like targeting arrays with biological components. But Krextal himself was a specimen that would have impressed even the Academy's xenobiology professors. His secondary arms bore the ritual scarification that marked him as a 3rd-generation warrior caste, while his primary arms displayed the kind of muscle density that came from growing up in gravity 3 times what most species considered survivable. He wore his Academy uniform like it was some kind of joke, the fabric straining against his frame as if it might give up and retreat to a safer garment at any moment. His gang Thek-Lon had run their profiles when they'd first arrived at the Academy consisted of Bex Mora, Zeph Rin, Qualneth, and Nex Val. Each one a walking advertisement for why the Vorthak supremacy considered themselves the galaxy's premier warrior race. Each one carrying themselves with that particular swagger that said they'd never met a problem they couldn't solve with application of superior firepower and overwhelming physical force. The other students seemed to develop sudden, intense interest in their meals as the Vorthak group made their way across the dining hall. Conversations died, utensils clinked nervously against plates, and more than one species equivalent of sweating became apparent to Thek-Lon's chemical sensors. Smart response, really. The Vorthak had a well-documented history of viewing other species as either useful allies or entertaining prey. There wasn't much middle ground in their cultural philosophy. What made Thek-Lon's sensor arrays focus with sudden intensity was the trajectory of their movement. They weren't heading for their usual table in the hall's center, where they typically held court and made loud proclamations about Vorthak superiority. Instead, they were moving with deliberate purpose toward Table 47, toward Maya Blackwood. The human continued eating her protein paste with the same mechanical precision, apparently oblivious to the approaching storm. Her vital signs at least, what Thek-Lon could read through his passive scanners remained steady. Heart rate constant, body temperature normal, no stress indicators in her biochemical emissions. Either she was completely unaware of the danger, or she possessed a level of self-control that bordered on the supernatural. Krextal positioned himself directly behind Maya's chair, his shadow falling across her meal like a declaration of intent. His gang spread out in a loose semicircle, effectively trapping her against the table. The positioning was textbook intimidation: surround the target, eliminate escape routes, establish dominance through superior numbers and size. Thek-Lon had to admit they were good at this. Well? Krextal's voice rumbled through the translator, though Thek-Lon suspected the menace came through clearly in any language. Look what we have here, brothers. A lost little soft skin, all alone. Maya took another bite of protein paste. 12 seconds, just like all the others. Bexmora leaned forward, his secondary arms bracing against the table's surface. I heard humans are supposed to be social creatures, pack animals, like the Grex hounds we hunt on Vorthak Prime, but this one seems broken. Maybe she's scared, Qualneth suggested, his vocal cords producing what passed for laughter among his species, a sound like grinding metal that made several nearby students flinch. "I bet she's never seen real predators before." Zephyrin crouched down to Maya's eye level, his face uncomfortably close to hers. "Hey, gravity crawler. You know what gravity crawler means in Old Vorthak? It means something so weak it has to crawl along the ground because it can't handle real weight." Still no response from Maya. She continued eating with that same mechanical precision, as if 5 of the galaxy's most notorious bullies weren't surrounding her table and making threats. Krextal's patience, what little the Vorthak possessed, seemed to be wearing thin. "Are you deaf, meatbag? Or just stupid? When a Vorthak warrior speaks to you, you show respect." He reached out with one of his secondary arms and flicked Maya's water glass, sending it skittering across the table. The liquid spilled across the surface, soaking into her meal tray. Maya paused in her eating, for exactly 3 seconds. Then she calmly reached for her napkin and began cleaning up the spill. Nexval laughed, that same grinding sound that made Theclon's audio processors want to shut down in self-defense. Look at it clean up its own mess, just like a good little pet. "I wonder," Krextal mused, his voice taking on a tone that made Theclon's threat assessment protocols start blinking urgent warnings. "What would happen if we tested this little pet's limits? Humans are supposed to be emotional creatures, right? All feelings and reactions and primitive responses?" He leaned down closer to Maya, his breath visible in the cooler air of the dining hall. "What do you say, soft skin? Want to show us what happens when a Deathworlder gets angry? Or are you as pathetic as the rest of your species?" Maya set down her spoon, placed her napkin beside her tray, folded her hands in her lap, and continued to say absolutely nothing. The silence stretched like a taut cable, and Theclon found himself holding his breath, metaphorically speaking, waiting for something to snap. The dining hall had gone dead quiet, that peculiar kind of silence that occurs when everyone knows something terrible is about to happen, but nobody wants to be the one to stop it. Theclon's sensors picked up elevated stress indicators from at least 30 different species. Heart rates climbing, body temperatures fluctuating, chemical signatures showing everything from fear to excitement to morbid curiosity. The ethereal collective students had gone completely still, their energy forms barely visible as they tried to avoid drawing attention. The Hive Queen drones were clustered together, their antennae twitching in agitation. A few of the more aggressive species, some young Thorian males, a pair of Keth siblings, seemed to be enjoying the show. Their biosignatures showed the kind of anticipation that came from watching someone else get hurt while knowing you were safely out of harm's way. The smarter students were quietly gathering their belongings and finding reasons to be elsewhere. Theclon noted with professional interest that the Alterian diplomat's daughter had already left, along with most of the Centauri exchange students. Survival instincts varied by species, but those who'd lasted long enough to make it to the academy generally knew when to remove themselves from dangerous situations. What fascinated Theclon most, though, were Maya's readings. His passive scanners were high-end hegemony military hardware designed to monitor biological functions from a distance without being detected. They could track heart rate, body temperature, stress hormones, neural activity patterns, and a dozen other indicators that revealed emotional and physical states. Maya Blackwood's readings were impossible. Heart rate, steady at 68 beats per minute. Body temperature, constant. Stress hormones, baseline. Neural activity, calm, focused, almost meditative. Either his equipment was malfunctioning, or the humans sitting calmly, while being threatened by 5 Vorthak warriors, possessed a level of self-control that defied biological explanation. Theclon was beginning to suspect his equipment was working just fine. Krextal's frustration was becoming palpable, literally. Theclon's chemical sensors were picking up the distinct pheromone signature that Vorthak released when their predatory instincts were being thwarted. It was the same smell that preceded most Vorthak violence, a biological warning system that had evolved to tell other species when they were about to become prey. The massive warrior straightened to his full height, his shadow completely engulfing Maya's small form. Then, with deliberate slowness, he began to circle her chair like a predator stalking wounded prey. "You know what I think?" Krextal's voice had dropped to what the Vorthak considered a whisper, which was still loud enough to be heard 3 tables away. "I think this little soft skin is broken. It's defective. Not even worth the effort to intimidate." He reached out with one secondary arm and flicked a piece of Maya's protein paste off her tray. It landed with a wet splat on the floor beside her chair. Maya continued eating what remained of her meal. Another spoonful, perfectly timed. Bexmora joined in, using his primary arm to knock over Maya's remaining utensils. They clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the unnaturally quiet dining hall. "Oops," he said, not bothering to make it sound accidental. "Clumsy me." Krextal moved behind Maya's chair again, this time positioning himself so close that his legs were almost touching the back of her seat. Then, as if testing her reactions, he gave the chair a small bump with his knee. Maya's posture didn't change. She simply reached for her napkin again and continued her mechanical routine. The bump came again, harder this time, hard enough to jolt most species forward, to make them spill their food or lose their balance. Maya absorbed the impact like it was nothing more than a gentle breeze. Krextal's pheromone output spiked. Theclon's threat assessment protocols were now flashing warnings in 3 different colors, which in his experience usually meant someone was about to do something catastrophically stupid. "Maybe she's not just broken," Qualneth suggested, his metallic laughter grating against Theclon's audio processors. "Maybe she's already dead. Just a corpse that hasn't figured out it should fall over." The third bump was hard enough to shift Maya's chair several inches forward. A normal being would have been thrown against the table, possibly injured. Maya simply adjusted her position and continued eating. Krextal's frustration finally boiled over into the kind of rage that made Vorthak famous throughout the galaxy for their violence. His 4 arms flexed, muscles bunching under his metallic skin, and Theclon's sensors detected the biochemical signature that preceded Vorthak Berserker episodes. This was about to get very, very bad. "You want to know what we do to prey animals on Vorthak Prime?" Krextal leaned down until his face was inches from Maya's ear, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to carry to every corner of the dining hall. "We start by breaking their legs, nice and slow, so they can't run. Then we break their arms so they can't fight back." Maya's spoon paused halfway to her mouth, for exactly 2 seconds. Then she resumed eating. "Then," Krextal continued, his voice taking on the kind of satisfaction that came from describing something he'd actually done before, "we play with them. See how long they last before they start begging. Humans are supposed to be good at begging, aren't they? All that emotional expression. All those tears and screams." Several students at nearby tables were quietly leaving now, their survival instincts finally overriding their curiosity. Theclon noted that even some of the more aggressive species were looking uncomfortable. There was intimidation, and then there was whatever this was becoming. "I'm thinking," Krextal said, his secondary arms beginning to reach toward Maya, "that maybe you need a demonstration. A little preview of what happens to soft skins who don't show proper respect to their betters." His hand, easily large enough to crush Maya's skull, moved toward her hair with deliberate slowness, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his metallic skin. "What do you say, little prey animal? Ready to start screaming for me?" Maya set down her spoon, placed both hands flat on the table. And for the first time since the harassment had begun, she turned her head to look directly at Krextal. Her expression was perfectly calm, almost curious, like she was studying him. What happened next took exactly 1.7 seconds, according to Theclon's chronometer. Later, when he filed his report with Hegemony Intelligence, he would describe it as the most perfectly efficient display of violence he had ever witnessed. Maya's left hand moved. Not quickly, exactly. Theclon had seen faster movements from various species. But there was something about the precision, the absolute economy of motion, that made his threat assessment protocols scream warnings he'd never seen before. Her fingers closed around Krextal's extended wrist with what appeared to be gentle pressure. The massive Vorthak warrior had perhaps half a second to register surprise before Maya's grip tightened and twisted. The sound of Krextal's neck snapping was like a gunshot in the silent dining hall. He dropped like a sack of failed engineering, all 8 feet and 4 arms of apex predator collapsing in a heap beside table 47. His eyes, those targeting arrays that had tracked prey across 3 star systems, stared sightlessly at the rainbow-colored ceiling. Maya reached for her spoon with her right hand and took another bite of protein paste. The entire sequence had been completed without her standing up, without her even turning her body. One hand to kill a Vorthak warrior, the other to continue eating lunch. Theclon's sensors were going completely insane, flashing error messages he'd never seen before. Maya's vital signs remained exactly the same as they'd been 5 minutes ago. Her heart rate steady. Body temperature constant. No stress indicators whatsoever. She looked up at the 4 remaining Vorthak warriors, who were staring at their leader's corpse with expressions of complete incomprehension. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the dead silence. "You're blocking the light." Then she returned to her meal as if absolutely nothing had happened. The dining hall erupted into the kind of chaos that Theclon's reports would later describe as a complete breakdown of civilized behavior. Students screamed in languages he didn't recognize, chairs overturned as various species fled for the exits, and the air filled with the cacophony of 47 different panic responses. The remaining 4 Vorthak warriors stared at their leader's corpse for exactly 3 seconds before their species' infamous pack mentality kicked in. With roars that made Theclon's audio dampeners engage automatically, they launched themselves at Maya with the kind of coordinated fury that had made them the galaxy's most feared shock troops. Maya finished chewing her current bite, swallowed, and then moved. Bex Mora came in from the left, all 4 arms reaching for her in a grappling attack that should have crushed her instantly. Maya leaned back in her chair, still sitting, caught his primary arm, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the table with enough force to crack the reinforced polymer surface. All Neth and Zeph Rin attacked simultaneously from the right, their coordination flawless. Maya's response was a blur of economical motion, a palm strike that sent Qual Neth's secondary arm bending in directions that definitely weren't anatomically correct, followed by an elbow that caught Zeph Rin in what passed for his solar plexus among his species. Both warriors collapsed, their nervous systems apparently deciding that unconsciousness was preferable to processing the pain signals their bodies were sending. Nexval, demonstrating either incredible courage or incredible stupidity, grabbed Maya's chair from behind and lifted it, and her completely off the ground. His plan, presumably, was to slam her against the floor with enough force to break every bone in her small human body. Maya reached back, grabbed something on Nexval's face, and twisted. He released the chair and crumpled, joining his pack mates in unconsciousness. Maya landed gracefully, still in her chair, and reached for her spoon again. The Academy security arrived with the kind of response time that suggested they'd been monitoring the situation from the beginning. Theclon wasn't surprised dining hall incidents were common enough that most stations maintained surveillance protocols specifically designed to prevent interspecies conflicts, from escalating into diplomatic crises. What did surprise him was the composition of the security team. Instead of the usual Academy peacekeepers generally recruited from species known for their diplomatic skills rather than combat prowess, the team was led by Commander Vexandra of the Hegemony Marines, along with a full squad of battle-hardened professionals. Someone had been expecting trouble. "Secure the scene," Vexandra ordered, her voice carrying the kind of authority that came from commanding respect across multiple star systems. "Medical teams for the wounded. Everyone else out, now." The dining hall cleared with impressive speed, leaving only security personnel, medical staff, Maya, who was still eating, and Theclon, whose intelligence core credentials granted him observer status. Maya looked up as Commander Vexandra approached her table. "Am I in trouble?" she asked, her tone exactly the same, as if she'd inquired about the weather. "That depends," Vexandra replied, studying the 5 unconscious Vorthak warriors scattered around table 47 like discarded toys. "Are you Maya Blackwood, registered student identification number 7749 Alpha?" "Yes, Ma, I am." "Then no, you're not in trouble. But we need to talk." Theclon's curiosity finally overcame his professional detachment. As the medical teams began treating the unconscious Vorthak, 3 broken bones, 2 severe concussions, and 1 case of what the medics were calling comprehensive nervous system shutdown, he accessed his secure terminal and pulled up Maya Blackwood's academy file. The basic information was standard: height, weight, species designation, homeworld information. Born on Earth, admitted to the academy 3 weeks ago as part of the Cultural Exchange Initiative, assigned to standard xenobiology and interspecies relations courses. But something felt wrong. The file was too clean, too simple. Most academy files contain detailed psychological profiles, academic records, family histories, and dozens of other data points that helped administrators place students in appropriate programs. Maya's file contained none of that. Just the basics, plus a single notation: special admission, Hegemony Council authorization required. Theclon's security clearance should have been high enough to access whatever additional information existed. The fact that it wasn't suggested that Maya Blackwood's real file was classified at levels that most Intelligence Corps officers never saw. Which raised a very interesting question. What kind of student required that level of security clearance? The answer, he suspected, was the kind who could disable 5 Vorthak warriors without leaving her chair. 20 minutes later, Theclon's security override codes finally granted him access to Maya Blackwood's real file. What he found made him recalibrate every assumption he'd made about humans, Deathworlders, and the Academy's admission policies. Maya Elena Blackwood, Colonel, Earth Defense Forces Special Operations Division, veteran of the Titan Colony Wars, where she'd spent 3 years fighting off the Zephyrian invasion that had claimed 4 million human lives before the Hegemony Council finally intervened. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, and a dozen other decorations that Theclon had to look up because he'd never heard of conflicts severe enough to warrant them. Her military record read like something from a tactical horror story. 47 confirmed kills in close quarters combat, an expert in 17 different forms of hand-to-hand fighting. Psychological profile noted exceptional emotional control under extreme stress, and unusual ability to function normally while processing trauma. The real revelation came in the file's final section. Maya Blackwood wasn't at the academy as a student. She was here as a military observer, part of a classified Hegemony Council program designed to assess human military capabilities for potential integration into Council defense forces. The Cultural Exchange Initiative was a cover story. Maya was conducting her own intelligence operation, observing Academy security protocols and student behavior while pretending to be a harmless primitive from a backwater Deathworld. The cute, fragile, harmless human who'd been eating lunch while 5 Vorthak warriors threatened her was actually a decorated Special Forces officer who'd been analyzing the Academy's defenses for 3 weeks. Theclon looked across the dining hall at Maya, who was calmly answering Commander Vexandra's questions while medics loaded unconscious Vorthak warriors onto stretchers. The galaxy's assessment of humans as cute but fragile primitives was going to require some serious revision, it possibly starting with the word harmless.